a song of faith associated with those who witnessed with their own eyes the Nazi horror. Ani ma'amin, I believe, be'emunah shlema, with perfect faith, b'viat HaMashiach, in the coming of Mashiach, in the possibility of a world made whole, in a possibility for redemption in a world blackened by the flames of the Shoah. This Monday night into Tuesday at sundown, Jewish communities all over the world observed Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura, our sacred day for memorializing the Holocaust and acts of heroism. At Westchester Reformed Temple, it has been our custom for decades on the Shabbat that is closest on the calendar to Yom HaShoah to observe a service of responsibility where we will commemorate the legacy of the Shoah, where we will remember the 6 million of our people murdered by the Nazis and the millions of other human beings who went to their deaths in that time of fire and hatred. And also to recommit ourselves to the mission of the Jewish people, never again. Never again shall we allow genocide to take place among God's children, among our people, or any of the human family on our watch. It is customary in Jewish communities all over the world to commemorate Yom HaShoah through the lighting of 6 candles representing the 6 million. And we are honored that families who count among themselves survivors of the first, second, and third generations of the Shoah, that is to say, the children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren of the victims and survivors of the Shoah, are here in our congregational community tonight. We have many members of Westchester Reformed Temple with a sacred connection through their own family stories to the Shoah. Among them are those who will light these candles. We'll be honored to have honoring us tonight Lauren and Bradley Bass and their family, Dave Friedman and his family, Matt and Jen Levine and their family, Eric and Liza Levy and their family, Jessica Zweifach and Matthew Sternman. And the 6th candle tonight will be lit by Dr. Aliza Erber, who later in tonight's service of responsibility will share her own story as a hidden child of the Shoah, when the Nazis invaded her home in Holland in the latter part of World War II when she was just an infant. Thus began an incredible story of escape and survival and hope against the odds. And you'll hear her story told in her own words and with images to accompany the story. We're so grateful that Dr. Erber is with us tonight. She is not a stranger to Westchester Reformed Temple, having taught in our religious school, now Jewish Learning Lab, for many years, having served our wider Westchester County as a caring presence, rabbinic pastor, and even as a doctor of podiatric medicine. So welcome, Dr. Erber. Thank you, Rav Aliza, for sharing your story with us tonight. As we light these candles, we will hear the melody of the song Eli, Eli, words that were given to us by the Zionist poet Hannah Senesh, a Jew who emigrated from her native Hungary to Eretz Yisrael and who volunteered as a paratrooper and paratrooped behind enemy lines in Yugoslavia to aid the anti-Nazi effort, where she was captured by the Nazis and executed by firing squad in 1943. My God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart. We light these candles of memorial. Oh, and of course, Ellen Sunnis is with us tonight too, part of the Bass family. Thank you. It is so meaningful to reintroduce to our community Rebecca Cherry, whose soulful music and spiritual leadership lifts our hearts on the High Holy Days and is with us tonight with Ara. Hi, Ara, in the front row. Joined by our incredible musicians, Pete Malinverney, Jerome Morris, and Idan Sandhaus, and all of us on the Bima as well. I, Jonathan Blake, and Amanda Kleiman, our senior cantor Danielle Rudnitsky, Rabbi Leah Citron, and our temple president, Warren Haber, wish to extend our heartfelt gratitude to all of you and to the whole congregation. We wish Shabbat Shalom, both those who sit with us tonight, including our entire sixth grade student and parent class. Sixth graders tonight accept the responsibility of memory and have been paired, each student, with a child who perished in the Shoah. In some cases, only a name or a place of birth or a parent's name is known to us. What they share is a legacy along with close to 1.5 million other children that they were targeted for murder by the Nazis only because they were Jewish. And they did not live to reach the age of bar or bat mitzvah. And so it has been the long-standing custom at WRT for every student approaching the age of bar and bat mitzvah to take upon themselves the responsibility to remember. We'll see our sixth grade students on the Bima tonight when we bring our Torah scroll out into the congregation, the special Torah scroll that resides in the middle of the Aron HaKodesh, itself a survivor of the Nazi assault. We are grateful also that these 6 are not the only lights we have, well, I should say, attempted to kindle tonight. There's a pool of wax in number 5 that's preventing it from lighting up, so you'll just have to bring a little bit more spiritual light to the occasion tonight. We are also grateful that we have a few families who are aglow with joy. Tomorrow morning, Ginger Helligers will become the last 8th grader at Westchester Reform Temple for this year to celebrate Bat Mitzvah, and her 7th grade counterpart, Carly Koch, will have the honor in the afternoon of celebrating Bat Mitzvah, both here on the Bima of WRT. We would love for the Helligers, Lieberman, and Koch Leifer families to join us up on the Bima to help us kindle these lights for Shabbat. Amen. So for centuries, Jewish people counted mitzvot, the sacred responsibilities that make up a meaningful Jewish life, and assigned to the number of mitzvot that fill a Jewish life 613. That's the traditional number. I haven't counted myself. I know there are a lot of them. But Maimonides and others said 613 mitzvot. But it has been taught after the Holocaust, the 614th mitzvah, a 614th commandment was given to the Jewish people, and that is, thou shalt not grant Hitler a posthumous victory. It is our responsibility to live in such a way that proves that the Nazis' final solution could not come to pass. And you, Carly, and you, Ginger, are living, glowing emblems that we shall not grant Hitler any posthumous victories, and that the soul of the Jewish people remains strong and unbroken because young people like yourselves take it upon themselves to carry it proudly forward. And so we wish you Mazel Tov and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much. We'll continue now on page 142 in our prayer books.
Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem lishalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Nir Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzidchem lishalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
We rise in praise and in prayer. Will all who are able to stand please join us for Baruch Hu on 146.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed.
You felt it this week. You saw the green and the pink explode outside. Spring has arrived. And with it, a new month on the Hebrew calendar. Today, Rosh Chodesh Iyar. The month of Pesach is now in the rearview mirror. We're counting the days to Shavuot, the feast of Revelation, to be observed this year on May 25th and 26th. It's always important to recognize that we live amid changing times and changing seasons, and the fact that the sun rose this morning is a miracle not to be taken for granted. Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv aravim, blessed the one who causes evening to fall and the sun to rise anew. 152.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha ubechol nafshecha ubechol meotecha vehayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha veshinantam levanecha vedibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha b'derech uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha ukshartam leot al yadecha vehayu letotafot b'neinecha וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
The setting of Micha Mocha that we're going to sing together has this beautiful call and response where the cantor will sing Norah Tehilot, and we want to hear you sing back Norah Tehilot. God works wonders, creates miracles.
Adonai et Yaakov, ugelo mi'ad chazak mimenu, Baruch atah Adonai,
Baruch Shemo.
Ga'al Yisrael.
Amen. Vishamru 162.
Shabbat, et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם, ברית עולם, ברית עולם. את השמיים ואת הארץ. וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש.
164. Please rise. שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך
Declare your praise.
166.
Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu ve'imotenu,
Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak,
ve'Elohei Yaakov,
Elohei Sarah,
Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Ve'koneh Hakol, Ve'zocher Chasdei Avot ve'imahot, U'mevii Gula livnei bneihem, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב והושיע, מוריד הטל. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה,
ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני,
מחיי הכל.
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני,
האל הקדוש. We invite you to take your seats. So we have a few moments to pray silently. If you are moved to continue silently with the words of the Siddur, please leave your prayer books open and follow at your own pace. If you would like just to spend a few moments in silent reflection and remembrance on this special Shabbat of remembering the victims of the Shoah, then please use these moments for your own meditation in that direction.
As we give honor to our Torah and celebrate its survival, our survival, I invite forward our 6th graders at this time that we might celebrate, that we might honor, that we might remember together in this your 2nd task of remembering those whose names you were paired with at dinner before. Please rise.
You may be seated. Again, it is the honor of the entire community, clergy, and professional staff of Westchester Reformed Temple that Dr. Eliza Erber is with us this evening. I should say, back with us. It is such a nice reunion to have somebody who has already distinguished herself as a caring, compassionate, and loving teacher here at WRT, here tonight to teach all of us through the lens of memory and family story. We're especially grateful as well to our partners at the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center of New York, who have partnered with us in bringing Dr. Erber back to the Westchester Reformed Temple to hold forth with us tonight to share her story. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. feels like coming home. Really does. So thank you for having me here today. I always feel a little overwhelmed when I'm about to speak about my family's Holocaust experience. But I want to share with you that the opportunity to honor those who have perished is a real honor to do. And also, not only the ones who have perished, but I also want to mention that it's a real honor to remember the ones who survived. Well, not remember, they're here. All the people who survived, who despite everything that they went through, have managed to pick themselves up, put one foot in front of the other, and establish new families and live. That's our commandment, life above all for us. So, okay, this is a slightly different setup for me, so bear with me, please. There we go. Okay, so my Austrian-Dutch family was just what I consider to be an ordinary family. My grandfather, the fellow back here with the mustache, if you see him, nod your head. If you see my cursor, thank you. He was an artist, a professional painter, a professional artist, and made a very nice living at that. He lived in Vienna, Austria, and married there. And then my mom, who's the young lady, she's about 15 over here, was born in Vienna as well. And shortly after her birth, her mom passed away. And my grandfather had two sisters, as well as his own mother, in Holland. And so he brought his infant daughter to Holland, and she was raised there by her Tante Emma. Tante means aunt, by her Aunt Emma. And Tante Ella was there as well, and Oma, which means grandma, Oma Babette, was around. So it was a whole, there was a whole nuclear family. Tante Emma over here, next to my mom, had two sons, Kurt and Hans had a girlfriend that he was going to, he was engaged to be married. So life was really good for my mom growing up. The family was well-to-do. My mom had her own German Shepherd, her own pet. It didn't belong to anyone else but her. And she showed a lot of talent as a young woman, a young girl at the time, and she was accepted into one of the most prestigious art schools in The Hague. My mom actually abandoned her art for many years. She returned to it after she retired, unfortunately. I mean, unfortunately, she abandoned it. I would have wished for her to continue with that in which she had so much to give and such a good talent. The family had a cook. My mother had a nanny even when she was older, and they had two chambermaids. So as you can see, they were well-to-do, and life was really, really good. My mother actually, when she went to art school, showed a lot of promise. I keep saying that, but how do I go back? Hold on. Yeah. When my parents retired to Israel, back to Israel, she finally went back to do some art, and she went and started doing statues and stuff like that. And she also did very nicely with that, even with a 50-year or 40-year hiatus. in between her artwork. I put a necklace on that lady because one of my grandchildren didn't like it. Like that. So as I said, the family was ordinary, regular. Everybody went to school, everybody did their thing, everybody was happy. It was really wonderful until the Germans arrived in The Hague. So my mother grew up in a rather secular home. She knew very little about Judaism, and if she ever thought about her family religious affiliations at all, she probably actually would have considered herself a Christian. Her grandmother, Oma Babette, my great-grandmother, whom of course I never met, was born and raised Roman Catholic in Hungary, in Budapest, Hungary. As a young woman, Oma Babette happened to visit Vienna. She went to the theater, because that's what you did when you went to Vienna. She met the actor, she went to the theater, she met the actor, they fell in love, and they ended up getting married and going to Holland. And, well, they lived in Vienna first, then to Holland. And forgive me, I get lost a little bit sometimes. So they had 3 children, and my grandfather was the oldest, and he had the 2 sisters. They didn't celebrate Judaism, and they didn't celebrate Christianity. I think they might have had a Christmas tree during Christmas, and that's about it. The fact that she was one religion and that he was another absolutely did not impact on their lives. They had a good life. They loved it. Their neighbors, there was a mixed population, and it really didn't matter at all. And of course, that ended when the Nazis arrived. I'm ahead of myself. That's Oma Babette with 2 of her children. The 3rd one wasn't born yet. I'm going in the wrong direction, I think. Hold on, guys. Yeah. My mom? Okay. When the Nazis came into The Hague, they arrived in May of 1940. And their plan was to capture Queen Wilhelmina, the Dutch queen, have her surrender, and that way defeat Holland. It didn't happen because the queen was immediately whisked off to London, and she spent the war years in London. The changes for my mother and the rest of the population, especially the Jewish population, but also the Dutch population, came very swiftly. At first, there were signs that were tacked on bulletin boards outside and on trees, literally. Signs such as, Jews are not allowed to walk in the park. Jews are not allowed to shop in Christian shops. And the most important one, Jews must register. Now, that was the most severe because the moment you register, the Germans had your information, and they could find you anytime. My mother had a very good friend by the name of Miep, who actually then became engaged to my mother's cousin Hans. And she was not Jewish, and she was able to go anywhere within the town, and she would come often to the apartment to let my family know what was going on and what the rules were. And all of a sudden, and I don't know if you can wrap your brain around that, but all of a sudden, my mother, who and her family now were Jewish. Hitler instituted the blood laws, and so if somewhere in your family someone married a Jew, if you were a Christian, you married a Jew, and that Jew, even if that Jew converted, you now became a Christian, or vice versa. I always get that mixed up. I don't know. I have to look at it a bit more carefully. But I think you understand what I'm trying to say. At first, Jewish men began to disappear. In the beginning, they came home again after being beaten and whatever. But after a while, they no longer came home. Then not only Jewish men, but whole Jewish families disappeared. And that's one of the things that happened to my uncle, my great uncle Leopold, Tante Emma's husband. He was taken right off the street, taken to Gestapo headquarters, then he disappeared. And they couldn't find out what happened to him, where he was, not even with the help of the underground, which they all were very active in. So following Uncle Leopold's disappearance, my mother's Aunt Emma, Tante Emma, went into a deep depression. And my mother assumed the care of the household. The cook was gone. The chambermaids were gone because Christians were no longer allowed to work for Jews. So the spoiled little girl, who was still a teenager, by the way, had to assume the responsibility for the household. And on top of her domestic duties, she also had to go and find food. So the thing is that Jews were not allowed to shop in Christian shops. They, if there was any food available, they were the ones who had the food. So people like my mother had to go literally forage and scrounge around to find food, and sometimes farmers would sell them. But it was a very, very difficult situation, and after a while, starvation set in. Amsterdam suffered very badly during the war from lack of nutrition. My mom became a Dutch underground fighter, the same as my grandfather, and my mother became engaged to be married, and he also. So everybody in my family was a Dutch underground fighter. And because of that, they were able to find hiding places, because my grandfather knew that there was going to come a day when they are no longer going to be able to just be out there like the Christian population. So they arranged for hiding places just in case they had to. Well, they did. In 1942, my grandfather received notice through the underground that the family was put on a deportation list. And that meant that they had to go underground or into hiding ASAP, immediately. These hiding places, as I just said, were secured ahead of time. Now, when they first went into hiding, my mother discovered that she was pregnant. But that was already after they had secured hiding places, so there was absolutely no hiding place for me because they didn't know I was coming. One of the first hiding places, okay, I forget which way to go. One of the first hiding places for my mom was with a farm family, the Leffers family, and I always make sure I remember to say their name because they were upstanding people. And they already had 8 children, and they took my mother, lightened her hair a little bit because she had very dark hair, and she became child number 9. Didn't last very long, unfortunately, because the Nazis started invading most of the area around, and they came to check the farms as well. And my mother tells of a time when she was, the Nazis were coming, the Germans were coming, and she had to run into the barn to hide, and she would hide under the hay, sometimes for hours. Very difficult situation, very difficult to breathe. And at one such time, the Germans did come in. They must have smelled something because they took their bayonets and started hitting at the hay. My mom was okay. She didn't get hit. But she was 18 years old. I can't imagine myself at the age of 18 not opening my mouth and screaming or something when the bayonets are coming right next to me. So the Leffer family, as some other farm families in Holland, also worked with the underground. And they were not Jewish. They were Christian, Dutch, and but they got paid for hiding people in their homes. And I want you to understand that even if they got paid, it was still a very heroic thing for them to do, because if the Nazis found a Jew on their property, all of them would have been killed immediately. So it's just an amazing thing. It was very difficult, whether you were a Jew or not a Jew, to help a Jew if you were not a Jew, because your life was on the line doing so. My mother's grandmother, Oma Babette, as I had mentioned before, was a Roman Catholic who had raised her 3 children. Is she up there? Yeah. Who had raised her 3 children marginally as Catholics. And that includes, of course, my grandfather and his 2 sisters. Eventually, many years later, when the Nazis came, they rounded her up. At the age of 85, they shoved her onto a cattle car without windows, without food, without water, without toilet facilities. She survived the trip, which I think was 2 or 3 days, crowded body against body at that age, at the age of 85, only to be murdered the moment she got to Auschwitz. They put her in the gas chamber. This is a stock photo. Obviously, I don't have a photo of the train that she was on, so this is a stock photo that I found online. This is Cousin Kurt, and the reason I bring that picture up is because this must have been early on, because I see from his demeanor that he's not all that worried right now. But what I want to show is the Jewish star that he already had, that they already had to put on. And I have at home a picture of my grandfather, my mother, and his 2 daughters from his marriage, his second marriage. And they're all, even the children, are wearing the Jewish stars. Both cousins, Hans was murdered at the age of 32. Kurt was murdered at the age of 36. They were caught while working for the underground. And Miep, who was able to get into Gestapo headquarters, tried very, very hard to figure out where they all went, because it wasn't just them, it was also other members of their cell, underground cell. And she found out that they were taken to concentration camp where they died. I was told this by my Aunt Betty, who is 85, almost 86 years old now. She's a little older than I. When my grandfather remarried, he had a second family. My mom was 16 already. So, and she and I are very close, and we sit and we talk. She was a hidden child because she was already here when they arranged hiding places. So they knew to arrange a hiding, and she had a hiding place with a family, a Christian family, whom she called Mama and Papa, only she refused to do that, and she's still very stubborn. And she would tell them that I have a Mama and a Papa, you're not my Mama and my Papa. And she tells that she actually went to sleep, to bed at times without supper, because they had to teach her that she had to do this. Otherwise, everyone was in jeopardy. This is my mother and my biological father, Richard Levy. They became engaged during all of this upheaval, and they were supposed to get married. And Richard was also in the underground. And his job with the underground was to get notices from someone who had infiltrated the Gestapo headquarters, get a list of the people that were put on transport lists, and then go and smuggle this one out and that one out. That was his job. And in one of those times, he actually was caught. And after being held in prison in The Hague for a few days, he was sent to a Dutch concentration camp that had started out as a transport camp and called Westerbork. He was at Westerbork for a while before he was transported out of Westerbork. And this is the man who my mom was married to later. She married him, and I'll show you something after this. And he was my biological father, and he's a father I never met. I never met him. He died he died when I was already a year and something old, but not where I was. He was in a different concentration camp. I was underground. This is a very remarkable document, guys. This is a marriage certificate from Westerbork. My mom had gotten permission to go to Westerbork to visit him, and they got married. And if you look way on top here, it says Westerbork. And that's very unique. All of these documents are going to end up at the Holocaust Museum in the city when I'm finished here. And on one side is the information of my biological father's parents, and on this side is my mom, Helga Steiner is her name. And another remarkable thing is that they were married by the camp commandant, the Nazi camp commandant, and he signed the certificate. My mom also tells, once I learned about Richard, she told me that he was the eternal optimist. He wrote her letters from Westerbork, and he always thought that Westerbork was but a temporary pit stop, so to speak, that he was going to come home again, which of course unfortunately did not happen. This is a letter he wrote my mom from Westerbork, and this is at a time when Westerbork already became a labor camp and a starvation camp because they didn't feed the people. And it's over 80 years old. This was written before I was born, and I turned 80 this month. So this is over 80 years old, and it's on very, very thin paper, and both sides of the paper are written in very, very small print so that he could save paper. But in this letter, he tells my mom that they're planning in the camp to have a party of some sort to boost the morale, and could she please send a package of food, because there was no food available. And also he asked her if she'd gone to the doctor. He wanted to find out if she was pregnant or not. So let me move on here. Okay. From Westerbork, my father, by the way, Tuesdays were the dreaded transport days at Westerbork, and the people who were weaker because of the starvation or who got sick for some reason, so on Tuesdays they would pick those people out, put them on a transport to Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen or Dachau. And unfortunately, my father ended up on one of those, and he was transported from Westerbork to Dachau. To Theresienstadt, to Terezin. In Terezin, I went there with a play, and I went to the records room, and there was a young woman who sat, and there were ledger books, blue ledger books on shelves, and I walked in and I gave her my father's name. It took her less than 30 seconds to bend down. He was on a lower shelf, pull out a ledger book, and she opened it up to page 6, and he was name number 12, or vice versa, page 12, and he's name number 6. How come it's moving on its own? So that's Levi Richard, his date of birth, and some numbers, and I'm not quite sure what those numbers represent. So from there, he went to Theresienstadt. Okay. In Theresienstadt, I'm not in the right place, guys. Don't know where I am. Hold on, bear with me. Okay, let me go back. I don't, forgive me. This is a different system for me, so I'm a little bit off, but you're going to get the gist of it. I was born on April 2nd, 1943, in a small town called Almelo, where my family hid to get away from the Nazis. It was felt that the Nazis were less likely to go into a small town like that to look for Jews, but that was wrong. Eventually, they infiltrated every town in Holland, and they found a town. And when that happened, my mother literally disappeared. She had to disappear. And in my case, because they didn't know where to put me, they put me there. This is a bunker underneath the ground. And a righteous doctor, a righteous Christian doctor, who also worked with the underground, took 10 of us infants and put us in this hole underneath the ground. No windows, no doors. I tried to highlight the air vents, and if you can see up here, this is outside of the bunker. So there is a pipe over here, which was snaked down, and then the other end of the pipe was bent into the hole, into this bunker. And I believe that there are two on either side of the walls. There was no light. There was no sound, because they taped our mouths shut, because sound carries. We were babies. And they fed us, from what I understand, once a day, boiled grasses and tulip bulbs. This doctor eventually paid with his own life. I don't know what happened to the two nurses that worked with him. I was there for almost 2 years, almost 2 solid years, without nutrition, without seeing the sun, without seeing the sky, without seeing the air, and without human contact. Now I know why I am the way I am. But it is not a joking matter. This bunker was found, it was discovered, and I don't know what happened to the other children who were in that bunker. I'm glad I'm here. And something else that occurs to me, that Rabbi Blake mentioned before, that 1,500,000 children perished, were murdered during the Holocaust. If it wasn't for this righteous doctor, it would have been 1,500,001. So I'm very grateful to be able to be here and talk to you today. Of course, my mother did not know where I was. When she tried to find out, they told her that it was better that she not know, because if they caught her, she couldn't divulge what she didn't know. She couldn't tell what she didn't know. So I want to share a little bit with you how I found my father, because I didn't know about him. I didn't know anything about him all my growing up years. And maybe I have it in here later, but I'll tell you now that my mom was very ill. We were already in the United States, and I was 17 or so years old, and she got very ill, and I stayed home. And I was apologizing to her, as I always did, because I wanted to be an actor. And they didn't want their daughter to be an actor. My father was Viennese, and he said all actresses were whores, so there you go. So I could not follow what I really wanted to do. I'm not sorry about it today, but then I was angry. And I stayed with her from school, home from school, to help take care of her. She was really ill. And I apologized to her for being so difficult for my father. We're talking about my stepfather because she remarried. And she looked me straight in the face and she said, "He's not your father." And I said, "Well, where is my father? Who is my father?" And then she told me about Richard Levy, who died at concentration camp. Maybe I'll get to it again, I don't know. So aside from being a rabbinic pastor and a teacher, a podiatric physician, I'm also a playwright and an actor. And I went back to acting, guys. And in the year 2000, the theater group that I was with brought our acting company to the Czech Republic, which in my school days was called Czechoslovakia, to perform a Holocaust play at the Second International Jewish Arts Festival in Prague. For me, it was the beginning of a journey and quest that has not yet ended and will probably stay with me for the rest of my life. I had very little knowledge of the Holocaust or how my family had suffered during the Holocaust. And even though I knew I was born in Holland during the Holocaust, no one in my Holocaust survivor family ever spoke about anything, and certainly not to the children. So I really didn't know anything, but my hope is that you're here, you're listening, that children are taught and that they will understand that we can never, ever, ever forget any evil that goes about and is anywhere in this world, and there's plenty of it. But anti-Semitism is on the rise so badly right now that I am scared. So we were going with the company, acting company, and I, all of us, were going to visit Theresienstadt, Terezin. And I want you to use your imagination for a minute. It was a misty and rainy day, and we were in the middle of the woods because the road to Theresienstadt was in the middle of the woods. And we are on a bus. And we were a bus of all Jews, because not only were the actors Jewish except for one, and the directors and the organizers, but also there were a handful of tourists who had joined this particular trip to go visit the concentration camps. And the bus, it just stopped all of a sudden in the middle of the road, in the middle of the woods. It just stopped, and the woods were so beautiful. They were wet from the mist on the outside and so very verdant and so green. But the bus stopped, and when we started smelling something like burning. And now we think about that. I know that I was sitting there and I was shaking. I was the only survivor on this bus, the only person who had some sort of a history. Which of course I didn't share with anyone at the time. And here we were, a bus full of Jews, on our way to a concentration camp that not very long ago, and it wasn't just a concentration camp, it was an extermination camp, in a city where not so very long ago Jews were hunted down, tortured, killed, and burnt. And the smell of burn was in the air. For me, it was a little too much reality. They sent another bus, and the first thing we saw when we arrived at Terezin was a field of graves with a red rose bush at each head, what do you call those? A head thing, headstone. And vivid red, misty day, gray sky, very green grass. And when you looked up, by the way, these bodies that were buried in these graves were not necessarily whole bodies. They were arms from this, bones they found, legs from that bone, a skull from here, because the bones were in pits. So they just pulled together and made a body. And those are the bodies who are buried in those graves. There are no names on these headstones, just numbers. When you look up from there, this is the entrance to Theresienstadt. Black and white, very, very stark. And if you take a look at the grass on top, that's what my bunker, my hiding bunker looked like. They had the grass on top of the bunker so people didn't know that there was a hiding place underneath. And this is one of the, it's moving on its own, guys. I'm not touching it. And in one of the rooms that we passed, and look how stark it is, by the way. There's no flower, no trees, nothing. And with the door open, we passed a room that was considered a torture room. And on the wall were these handcuffs. And if you look hard enough, you can see how raw the wall behind these handcuffs are. And of course, with my imagination, I immediately pictured my father there. Finally, our guide brought us to barracks number 4. Barracks number 4 was the barracks where my father was interned. It was a small room with those wooden bunks along 3 walls, as you guys have seen already in other pictures, where the prisoners slept. The walls were stone, and they went all the way up, and at the ceiling, they came in and then pitched up like that. And that pitched part of that room was made out of opaque glass, and that was the only light that came into that room. There were also 2 small toilets at the entrance to that room. And this room originally was built to house 150 prisoners. By the time my father got there, it housed 600 men, most of them ill with dysentery and typhus. Typhus is a highly infectious disease that causes high fevers, headaches, delirium, and death. And dysentery is an infection of the intestines, and since 2 small toilets were not enough, these prisoners slept, ate, and sat in fecal material. Condensation would rise up to the glass ceiling and rain down in droplets upon them. No wonder they all caught typhus. And all of a sudden, I find myself alone in that room. Everybody went out. I didn't even hear the guide telling us I was, I think, in an altered state at that moment. And they all left, and I was standing there. I wanted to touch all the wood. I wanted to touch every part of that room that possibly my father had touched. It was really important to me. So I walked around, touching every bit of surface, because I needed to touch what my father had touched. I needed to touch the wood that my father had touched. I wanted to stand with him and say, "I love you." I couldn't. Instead, I buried my face in my hands, and I recited the mourner's Kaddish, the Jewish prayer for the dead. My sense of loss and grief was acute and overpowering. This was my father's last confinement, slave confinement, before he was sent on to Auschwitz. And he was sent on to Auschwitz because he was very ill. Barracks number 4 in Terezin was the last stop for my father before he was sent to Auschwitz, where he succumbed to the typhus. He was 32 years old. His crime? He was born a Jew. What you're looking at now is my father, Bert. My father, Bert, was part of the Brigada, the Jewish part of the British Army. And he fought in Italy, in northern Italy. And one of the things that I know about him, he was very young. He got wounded when he was there. And when he healed from his wounds, they sent him to Europe to train, militarily train the people in the underground there. And that's how he met my mother. And he never left her. And he's the only father I knew, because they married. And you should tell it not to move ahead without me. So Bert and the other Brigada unit mates were so proud of their role during the war. They showed the world that Jews could be soldiers and fight, and not just be meekly led to the slaughter, which is what happened at the camps. And not only that, these men were the nucleus of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, that fought for Israel to exist. So a little bit about my rescue. At the end of 1944 and the beginning of 1945, as the war was ending, only half of Holland had been liberated. My mother and Bert were in the liberated southern part of Holland. I was still in a bunker in the northern part of Holland, in the hands of Nazis. I was sort of told, and I can't vouch for this, that our bunker was found, and I think I mentioned that before, so that when Bert and Helga, my mom, managed to find me, I was no longer in that bunker. I was with nuns. I was taking cover with nuns who found me and took me in. Bert had managed to commandeer a military vehicle in which they made their way to the north. And then once they found me, they had to figure out how to get back down south. My mom told me at one time that when they saw me, she was rushing forward to try and pick me up, to get me, but I didn't know who she was. I didn't know who this stranger was, and I screamed, and it stopped her, and she was herself was so hurt, not that she blamed me, but she was so hurt by the fact that her own child, whom she had given away, not knowing whether she was going to see her again or not, at this point rejected her so vocally. As my mother began to share a little bit more, this is me about 6 months or so after I was connected back with my mom. My mom started sharing with me very little, but as she did, my own nightmares, because I didn't really have conscious memories of my 2 years in the bunker, but I had memories, and I couldn't explain what that was. I thought I was just weird, you know. And as other children of Holocaust survivors who were in a similar situation as I will share with you. I belong to a Hidden Infant Foundation, the Hidden Child Foundation under the ADL umbrella, and we have a subgroup called the Hidden Infant, which I'm lucky enough to facilitate at this point. And the stories, that was the first time I heard other stories that were a little bit like my own. And I understood that this kind of impact, being isolated and away from human contact for 2 years, it leaves you with a whole bunch of not good stuff. There is a psychiatrist by the name of Bessel van der Kolk, and some of you, if you're in that field, might know. He's the foremost man about, the word flew out of my brain right now. When you have post-traumatic stress disorder, he is the one who's most knowledgeable in this country anyway, and in Europe as well. And he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. He was right. The body keeps the score. My mind didn't fully keep it, but my body did. So my family married. My mother married Bert in Holland. This is my grandfather again, and my Oma. I call her Oma, even though she's my step-grandmother. She was my grandmother. And this is very shortly before my mom and I were put on a boat to Israel, on a ship to Israel. My father had to continue with his military duties. It was like an Exodus type ship, I guess. My father is Bert. I refer to him as my father because I didn't know Richard. So my father found his father shortly as the camps were being liberated. And this is the man in the striped jacket here is Opa Solomon. And this is a crematorium. And he brought him to Israel to live with us. And here's an interesting thing about this man. He was a little touched, for lack of a better word. And he once yelled at my mother when she was making chicken soup for putting water in the pot. He said to her, "I was starving at Dachau. Why are you diluting my food? Soup is made with water." But that's how he was. And also, if I had trouble with school or anything like that, he would look at me and say, "What you have in here, they can never take away from you." And the irony of it is that they did take it away from him. And then 1948, beautiful state of Israel was born. Okay. And this past August, my son couldn't make it. My daughters and I and my 3 grandsons went to Amsterdam to visit the family over there. And we went to the Walls Monument, and we found 11 members of my family on that wall. Each brick has the name of one person, and we're sitting over here, and either this one or this one is my father, Richard. And it was very healing to be able to see the names. Thank you. I'm open for questions if anyone needs to ask or has any questions to ask. Thank you. I know I speak for very long. I apologize. So, thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Rav Aliza, Dr. Erber, for sharing your family's very powerful story. We are deeply grateful to you for giving our entire community, but most especially the next generation of our youth, the opportunity to engage in the sacred responsibility of remembrance. As we prepare to recite our mourner's Kaddish in memory of the 6 million, we'll hear one more musical meditation. This is a song that is a reminder of the beauty and the vibrancy of Jewish culture in Europe before the Shoah. This is a song in Yiddish that came to us in the 19th century. A flame burns in the fireplace. The room warms up as the teacher drills the children in the Aleph Bet. Remember, dear children, what you are learning here. Repeat it again and again. When you grow older, you will understand that this alphabet contains the tears and the weeping of our people. When you grow weary and burdened with exile, you will find comfort and strength within this Jewish alphabet, and I'll add, within this Jewish tradition.
We will now honor the millions who were murdered by the Nazis, and we will add to the millions whose names may be unknown to us, those whose names are as close as the air we're breathing, the people who blessed us with their goodness, with their wisdom, with their light, with their lives, those taken from us in recent days, and those the anniversary of whose deaths we commemorate on this Shabbat. In the following order, we'd like our community to rise. If you have laid to rest a loved one within the last 7 days, would you please rise at this time? Those who are within 30 days of remembering a loved one, please rise. If you are within a first year of remembrance for a loved one, please rise. If tonight marks a yahrzeit, the anniversary of a loved one's death, would you please rise? In remembrance of the victims of the Shoah and in sympathy with our mourners in our community, would the entire congregation stand together? In the last 4 weeks, our community has lost the following loved ones and sends condolence to their bereaved families: Burton Chandler, father of Vicky Silver; Rhoda Bauman, mother-in-law of Amy Bauman, mother of Jennifer Crossan, grandmother of William and Rachel Bauman, and sister of Sheila Katz; Lori Horowitz, wife of Mark Horowitz and mother of Julie Bloom; and Jordan Horowitz, sister of Barbara Cedar; Shirley Navon Varan, grandmother of Bradley Bloom; Arnold Kessler, father of Susan Kessler Ross; Shelley Rubenstein, wife of Lawrence Rubenstein and mother of Jackie Belleck; Richard Lasky, uncle of Erica German; Murray Ginsburg, husband of Ruth Ginsburg and father of Daniel Ginsburg and Iris Howe; Wallace Musoff, husband of Sandy Musoff and father of Jay Scott and Adam Musoff; Cynthia Klebanow, grandmother of Jennifer Curtis; and Renee Ollinger, aunt of Nancy Michaels. And on their Yahrzeit, we remember tonight Joan Albin, Ann Auspitz, Joseph Bender, Ruth Brenner, Samson Broadwin, Herbert Cheskin, Stephen Cohen, Nancy Damashek, Erwin Ellman, Jack Feinsilver, Renee Feinsilver, Harry Ginsberg, Nathan Glickman, Harriet Goldberg, Joan Mark, Alan Gruber, Robert Hahn, Diane Hallenbeck, George Herzog, Jacob Hyatt, Frederick Jaffe, Rebecca Jajan, David Z. Johnson, Saul Bud Capel, Sarah Kaufman, Arlene Kirsch, Harry Levin, Rosalie Siegel, Stephen Lewis, Lily Lieberman, Harry Weinstein, William Mantell, Maxine Myers, Murray Nelson, Ruth Ortner, Adele Toby Peleus, Marcia Peleus, Nancy B. Raisin, Barbara Rosenberg, Alice Rudin, James E. Siegel, Neil Singer, Rose Smith, Alex Sussman, Arnold Weissman, Morris Weitz, and Stella Zelaznik. If you have additional names for our commemoration, or if inadvertently I've mispronounced the loved one's name, kindly speak your names at this time. Tehi zichronam baruch, may the memories of all the righteous abide as a blessing. Page 598. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chaye chon u'v'yomei chon u'v'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'izman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach le'olam alamei almaya, yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudusha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'asei shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen.
Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imeru amen.
I'd like to thank Victoria Kravitz, our greeter this evening, Hardy Mazel Tov to Ginger Helligers and her family, as well as Carly Koch and her family. We have Torah study as normal tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in person in the Sifriyah and via Zoom. Sharon Shabbat is meeting at 9 a.m. in the CJL. We have an MRJ breakfast on Sunday morning at 11:45 with Susan Klugman, discussing Jewish genetics. Celebrating Israel 75, we have a wonderful concert coming up next Tuesday night, if you haven't got your tickets, at 7:30 with Achanom Nini. We also have Jeffrey Salkin coming Wednesday at 7 p.m., our rabbi in residence, to discuss the future of wisdom, future of Judaism, sharing Shabbat next week as well with Jeffrey Salkin on Friday night. And our very own Isaac Sana Asor is in concert at WRT next Sunday at 2:30. We have so much more going on, I can't even go through it all. Let me just tell you that we have 2 amazing trips coming up later this year to Israel, so feel free to go online and take a look and learn more. Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, I was at a Westchester Board of Rabbis meeting yesterday, Rabbi Citron as well, and I sat next to Shachar Liran Hanan, who is the Israeli Shalicha, the Israeli emissary for Westchester County, and she wished me a happy second high holidays. 10 days are set aside in the fall from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. We call them the high holidays of the days of awe. But those of us who are deeply connected to the way in which Judaism is observed not only in September but throughout the year know that there's another 10-day period. It begins with Yom HaShoah, the Day of Remembrance for the Holocaust. We're in it right now. And it passes through Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance for Israel's fallen soldiers and victims of terror, which will be observed on Monday night, and culminates in Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's anniversary of independence, celebrating this year 75 years. Tuesday evening, join us for an incredible concert by one of Israel's leading musical artists, Noah, full name Achinoam Nini, here at WRT. And please join us throughout the week. We'll have a celebratory Friday night service a week from tonight where we will lift up our connection to the world's only Jewish state. We'd like for the congregation to rise, and we will sing a Borei Pri Hagafen, giving thanks for the sweet fruit of the vine.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Pri Hagafen.
L'chaim. We do not take for granted even a small bit of nourishment. After the remarks tonight, we know what a precious gift it is to be alive as individuals, to be alive as a Jewish people, where we can proclaim Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people against all the odds still lives, and to be alive as a human family in a time of challenge and change and disconnection. Feel strengthened not only by this food, but by the love that flows in this community. And if you are so moved and want to put your arm around somebody close to you, you can do that as we bless.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.